Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation. I'm Robin.
I'm Jenna.
I'm Heidi.
And today we are reacting to Stranger Things Season 4, Part 1. There is a lot to get into here, so this is actually going to be multiple episodes because there's just way too much for just one. So let's start off with just, some general reactions. Like, what were the big takeaways, generally speaking, the expectations we already talked about, were those expectations met, all of that jazz.
Yeah, so for me, we watched 2 episodes, and then I think we watched 2 episodes, and then we watched the final 3. I was trying to watch the last episode on its own, but yeah, we were like, how about we keep going? And it's fine if we have to stay up late, whatever. But of course, I remember messaging you after I watched the first 2 episodes, and you said you just finished the entire thing. That was like, Friday night or something like that? So you must have watched it all through pretty quickly.
I actually watched the first 2 episodes Friday night with Heidi, and then the next day she and I met with a bunch of our other friends and then watched the rest, episodes 3 through 7.
Yeah, it was a really cool day, but it was a lot of content, but it was an enjoyable experience.
Cool.
But the phrase I keep using is that by the end of episode 7, my brain was just scrambled eggs.
Yeah, it's so much. There's so much. That's definitely one of the overall things that I felt, and apparently you felt it as well. It was a little bit overwhelming. I'm sure it was even more overwhelming to watch 5 episodes in a row.
Most of the reviews I read leading up to the release, apart from one, which actually was from the same publication that I actually write for, Film Festival Today, that was the only overall positive review that I read. And they were all saying that the episodes are just too long, they're too sprawling, and they are long, but they're dense, and I feel like they've earned those runtimes in some ways.
I agree in some ways. I also agree that the episodes are too long, though, and that there definitely could have been things cut or condensed better, paced better, and we can get into that a little bit more.
Yeah, there were definitely places that felt super bloated to me, and, just that's because of the runtime and so on. But overall, I really enjoyed the experience, and I like what they're doing. I don't know. I'm kind of glad that I didn't have hopes, fears, expectations, because I would have got some of it right, but I also would have got a good portion of it wrong. And I think I found myself enjoying what they did, and at the very least feeling open to seeing where they're going.
But I was curious, what were your impressions at the very end of watching those 2 episodes, just overall?
I was maybe a little bit apprehensive that I wasn't going to enjoy this season quite as much, because the first 2 episodes have a lot more horror than some of the previous seasons. And I know I've talked about season 3 has a lot more body horror, which they said right out the gate that was how it was going to be. And it's not that I feel that it was done badly. It's just that that's supremely not my thing. So I was like, am I going to spend half of this season kind of hiding behind my popcorn, basically? What's interesting is that we stopped after episode 2, and then the approach to Vecna takes kind of a turn after that, and we don't see as much of that specific type of imagery. And I don't know that I would have noticed that delineation if we hadn't deliberately stopped there and then restarted the next day and did, the rest of the season as we know it. But I'm happy to say that my fear after those first 2 episodes of, this is just going to scare the ever-loving shit out of me, and I'm not going to be able to appreciate it because I'm going to be spending so much time being scared, didn't turn out to be true.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I felt like the end of episode 1, for all that it was more horror-based, I think I even said to you that night, I'm really enjoying this so much more than I did season 3. Immediately, it was so much better because it felt like Stranger Things.
Yeah.
So it was a very nice sensation at that point to feel like I'm really glad to be back.
Yeah, it was amazing to me how quickly I fell into it. Mm-hmm. And some things were disjointed and weirdly paced, but overall, I really enjoyed it. I really liked it. I had a really good time watching it. It was so compelling. This was such a compelling season. You always want to know what's happening next. It was very gripping.
And I also think that it's not the kind of compelling where it's compelling in the moment, but then after, like, when you go back and think about it, you're like, yeah, but I mean, some of that happened, but I feel good about it now, even with it like not right in front of me. Does that make sense? Am I explaining that very well?
Yes, absolutely. That makes sense to me. Yes.
A lot of, like, actually, I found myself several times throughout this season thinking about what you said a couple times in season 3, which was, I kind of just want to see these characters living their lives. Because so much of the beginning of the first episode is them just living their lives and dealing with ramifications from previous seasons.
The tone and the approach, they took some of the more broader season 3 things, and also some of like the expanded color palette, and then they kind of like meshed that with maybe season 2, where it is a lot more grounded, like more introspective kind of things. So I like that it feels much more connected cinematically to seasons 1 and 2.
Well, and yeah, I mean, like the themes of growing apart and growing up.
So relatable.
Yeah, I think that like straight out the gate, it was a really successful first couple episodes. I really enjoyed season 4. I have some big issues with the ending, but I also feel like you can feel them trying. The only thing about the beginning that I was very deeply upset by was the opening sequence, the misdirect of the massacre at Hawkins Lab. Because of that, and because of the events, the national events that have happened very recently, the way that they presented it actually reminded me a lot of Gus Van Sant's film Elephant, which is basically a movie that's inspired by the shooting at Columbine. So it was very uncomfortable going in, and it's not going to be a sequence that I rewatch. I don't know, I think it's also making us look at, like, was it necessary to present it in that way with that much blood? And I remember thinking, actually, that was one of the reasons that I liked the first episode and the second episode so much, was because it was like, despite that opening, I mean, because they released the opening sequence online before the actual season dropped, and I was very ready to be big mad about how they presented all of that, because I hated the idea of that actually being something that 11 did.
I never thought she did it. Even watching that scene, I was like, she didn't do it. Just watch. It was somebody else. On rewatch, they really focus on the hands and the fingers being twisted. And I was like, oh, shit. Like, should have picked up on that probably. So that kind of made sense. They were trying to give clues as to who did this in some of the very first shots. But I guess maybe they could have done without all the blood. Maybe that could have been a thing.
I keep coming back to that scene in season 1 when 11 first kills those 2 guards, and how that scene is basically bloodless, and yet it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And incredibly moving because of the cinematography, the editing, and Brown's performance. Because, and honestly, I want to say that's probably a really great example of all elements firing on all cylinders, because it's those things I just said, but it's also direction in terms of like figuring, like them directing the action and the blocking of the sequence, because she does. It's that she stands up, her shoulders go back, she spins around, her chin goes down, and then bang, she throws the guy against the wall. And the impact is the dent in the stone.
This whole season, I was so interested in what was happening in Hawkins. That is where the action was happening. That's where the intrigue was happening. I want to know what these kids are doing, what they're figuring out. I want to know about the Creel house. I want to know the lore here. And I do want to know how it's connected to the Hawkins lab, if at all, or or anything.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Hawkins. Like, let's dig into some of our characters there a little bit. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Max.
The Max scene with her defeating Vecna was really incredible. I actually don't want to get into like the, here's the why and so on and so forth, because I want to save that for, I was like, I don't need to do episode 1, but I'm doing episode 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I appreciated about Max at the beginning of this season is that she's still reeling from trauma, and so few characters were. Yeah, and the way that she keeps pushing everybody away. Something that I didn't like is how the way that Lucas kept treating her.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it didn't feel real. There was something so stiff about all their scenes together. I think there's maybe only 2 conversations that they have like this, but each one felt weird and like, it didn't work for me, where he's like, Max, I'm right here. Like, talk to me or whatever. And she just pushes him away. Like he's acting so differently in all of his other scenes. Maybe that's it. He just acts completely differently with her. I don't know.
Interesting, because I actually really liked their interactions. So that's so fascinating. Like the scene in the hallway between them, like in the very beginning, I liked that scene a lot because it felt organic to me. I liked so much of how they depicted the way that you have her experiences on two levels with like the supernatural and just regular grief, like in and of themselves, and then they also complement each other really, really well. Like I think the duality of those two things works so much better with Max than they did with 11. With Max, it worked so beautifully. I loved that. Even when they said like the headaches, the difficulty sleeping, and the upsetting dreams, if not nightmares, I was like, that so synergistically works, because it's like I went through all of those things. I think those are all very, like at first I even think it annoyed me. I'm like, those are all just common symptoms of grief and loss. But I think that was intentional, because then it's like, but then it feeds into it, and like.
Something that I really liked was, we know that her relationship with Billy was complicated. I loved that they addressed that when she's reading the letter to him. I love that she said, look, we hated each other. Yes. I mean, grief is complicated. Relationships with living people can be complicated. I'm so happy that they addressed it. And the way they wrote that was so good. And maybe she's not exactly mourning the relationship that they had that they lost, but the one that they could have had and lost. All the possibilities are gone. Everything that could have happened with them down the road is gone. And that's one of the biggest parts of, even if it was somebody that you loved dearly, whatever is down the road that could have happened is gone. That's the finality of death. That's the finality of grief. That's the worst part of it, when you think about all the possibilities that are just completely gone. And I just love the way that they put it.
100% same. Like I liked being able to go back and rewatch that scene, because as soon as she sat down and started reading it, I was like, okay, please do this well. And they did. I could not be happier with how they did exactly what I was hoping for. They bridged the gap between season 2 and season 3 Billy. Like, well, not so much his characterization, but just Max's relationship with him. And like, you know, especially in chapter 4 in the sauna test, I think we were speculating about maybe that's what she's saying. Maybe that's where that all came from, but we had no evidence of that. It was all like interpretation and speculation, but now it's there. It's right there in the show. And they also didn't belabor it. That letter was very nice and succinct, and it was just long enough. I loved that. I expected to be very emotional during that scene, but the scene that makes me super emotional was the running up the hill sequence, and particularly the monologue, or the montage rather, with all the cutaways of all her memories. Like
it was so spot on. So such a good end to the episode. What a good place to end it, which really I appreciated, because it made stopping easier. And because like we stopped watching after episode 4 and we did the next ones the next day. And so I appreciated that it didn't end on some cliffhanger, and that we were like, all right, let's go to the next one. That was a really nice pacing narrative moment where we could take a breath, and I appreciated that so much. And it was really well done. and it was so compelling. The sequence where she's running and the song is playing, so compelling. They just did fantastic. And Sadie Sink did such a good job that whole time. It was so good.
Well, and I loved the way that they managed, like, the urgency of that, of the other the three guys, like, going, you know, the, like, what is her favorite song? Like, just, you know, and it felt like you feel the tension there in such a realistic way. And I did the second time knowing exactly what was going to happen. I mean, we'd seen a lot of the clips of that in the trailers. So I figured, like, okay, well, that's got to be coming up soon. And Max is also in clips that we haven't seen after the graveyard. So chances are she doesn't die or anything here. But it didn't take anything away from the urgency and the stakes of those moments. And it's just so lovely. And again, knowing that I said it in the Hopes, Fears, Expectations, that it's the Junkyard group. It's that quartet. I love that group so much.
Yes. It's 100%. I love the fact that we have somewhere to go with Max's character, because she's in this spot. We can go somewhere with that. It's great. Yeah. I
feel very vindicated, because I remember, like, right after season 2 came out, and even into season 3, I remember like some of the fan conversation that I saw was like not very favorable towards Max. Like there were a lot of fans, there were a lot of people that loved Max and loved Billy, but a lot of people were like didn't like the introduction of those two characters, which I remember just being like, that's one of the reasons you need the second season, is because you don't have them. You don't have Max in season 1, and I love her. I've loved that character since she was first introduced. So I love that she got such a great arc.
Yeah,
so much screen time. I love it,
and it works. She's just such an important part of the ensemble at this point,
and she gets to be her own character. She's not just there to serve the rest.
Which is one reason why I'm glad that they broke up her and Lucas in a way, you know? Like, this show has been kind of dominated by the male characters and the male, stuff from the 80s. I read an article. I didn't really agree with everything this article said, but it was like, this is supposed to be 80s nostalgia, but it's really just like 80s boy nostalgia stuff. Because the Duffers were boys in the 80s. Like, where's all the girl stuff? Like, even Max is into boy stuff. Mm-hmm. And like, okay, all right, I get that. But like with Max, when she first came in, I was like, all right, well, we're introducing a girl, which means that she's going to be someone's girlfriend because we have a surplus of boys, right? And that's what happened. And that kind of annoyed me. So I'm kind of glad in that sense that they broke her and Lucas up.
As far as though the other Hawkins stuff goes, like, probably one of my favorite moments, possibly, I mean, certainly of the whole season, maybe it might even be in my like top 10 Stranger Things moments, is Erica's showdown with Eddie.
So good.
That whole game. I love it.
One of the things that I read in that same article that I mentioned before about, how it's a boy show about boy 80s things is how Erica is treated so well in that she gets into the boy stuff, the D&D stuff, but her character's name is Lady Applejack. She hasn't let go of any of the stuff she liked before. As soon as I heard Lady Applejack, I started laughing. I was like, that's a My Little Pony, isn't it? Like, I'm pretty sure I've heard that.
I didn't even put that together. That's amazing.
Yes. So it's really great that they allowed her to straddle those two things. And she's really coming into her own, Love that for her.
I loved that Eddie's concern was that she didn't know what the hell she was talking about with all of these super advanced players. Like, I don't think that Eddie is super invested in, like, helping people learn what D&D is. But then, like, he was so enthusiastic about letting her join once he found out, like, that, it was great. It was great.
Well, I don't know, though, because what I was just thinking was, like, the fact that in the cafeteria when Mike and Dustin are like, can we, like, postpone it? His whole thing is y'all are the future. Like his concern is like the next generation. So the fact that I remember even thinking that like when she showed up and he was all like dismissive. I'm like, didn't you just say like your concern is the next, you guys are the future of Hellfire. I want to keep it going because we're all going to be gone. So I guess what I'm saying is like then him smiling at the end of it and being like, welcome to Hellfire. And then his earnestness feels believable to me because it's like I do think he'd be like, cool, we have a new player.
Yeah. No, she's amazing. I also loved when Jason showed up and she just absolutely just read him for filth. Just literally the line like, oh, he took a step down from Max. I'm just like...
For real, yeah.
Ben, our friend that we were watching the season with, said of Erica in a very complimentary way that Erica's aggression is just always at 100%. And I feel like part of that is just her... She is not fooled by social niceties, but Jason has every privilege that you would, he walks into a room and everybody's going to defer to him just kind of like subconsciously, except Erica. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have opinions about Jason. I think Jason is basically like Vecna 2.0. You're like, I got my eye on you. He did just lose his girlfriend, but his like immediate transition to violence. So when he put his foot in that door, I was like, oh my God, he's like, cause he's bigger, he's older, he's white. Where are we going here?
Yeah.
And Erica just like kicking his ass, like added 5 years onto the end of my life. I swear to God.
Duck Hunt.
With Duck Hunt. Like, slam.
Yeah,
and everything about it. Even when she they took the light bright away from Holly, and then like Erica runs back and goes like, for your what what was it for your cooperation? Like handed her the Skittles. So she's amazing.
Yeah, like we need more of Erica Sinclair. We need more of Priya Ferguson. And I'm excited too because I feel like one of the things we haven't gotten through any of the seasons is we haven't gotten much interaction between she and Lucas. Yeah. So I'm excited because she's with Dustin and Lucas at this point and Max. So I'm excited to see like what that dynamic will look like. I'm also kind of just happy that like Lucas is hanging out with Dustin too. Like, considering that Lucas doesn't actually get a lot of screen time in the early part of season 4. And again, Caleb McLaughlin really making a lot out of not much. Like every time he's on screen, like he really does the most with what he's given. Just some of the nonverbal stuff he's doing, like with the team, and like when he has to put it together, like shit, they're gonna go after one of my best friends. Yeah. And kind of the realization of like, I don't want this. It's not worth it. But also feeling trapped, like, within that situation. Like,
and having to then fake it to try to figure out what they're going to do so that he can make it not happen. Lucas, I think the second that they started gearing up, like they were going to go hunt some freaks, Lucas would have been out of there. The Lucas that I know. The only thing that I could see him, like, I think he should have either totally be out of there or immediately switch into, like, reconnaissance mode. So I don't think it would have taken all of that time, especially like the scene where they show up at the band member's house and then he has to stand there and like act like he doesn't know. Like, I was like, this is preposterous.
I bought that stuff though more than the stuff with Angela and Elle. And in a way, I kind of feel like you can see some of that, the stuff that you've pointed out a lot in the past with that some of the gender comes into play there.
I do have a problem with Erica's character, though, which is like, where do you take a character like that? You know, she's such a confident person. Wouldn't you just love to see her doubt herself, have a moment of self-doubt that she has to overcome, but to come through it on the other side, stronger or something?
Depending on what they do with Steve at this point in terms of like his injury. Like if she saw that he was really hurt, like something like, I'm not saying that specifically, but something where like she hasn't really seen the stakes of like, she knows what they are, but I don't think she's seen anything like where it's like, no, like she didn't know Hopper, so even his death doesn't mean a lot. So maybe not even necessarily like doubting her confidence, but like just kind of getting scared, like seeing the real.
That's a good point too. She could just be shaken to the core by something, not necessarily her own self, but yeah.
Because even all of the serious stuff that she was part of in season 3 was some of the stuff they played for laughs. Like when the elevator fell, it was like they're all just screaming.
Yeah,
you know?
And even like Robin and Steve getting drugged and they were just making fun of them later. Yeah.
I just would like to see more of Erica, but I do have a feeling that Erica is going to be more present, like a lot more present in part 2, because I saw an interview in some of the press that they were doing where I think it was Good Morning America, where Priya Ferguson said that one of the things that's nice about this season is that you get to see more of what Erica actually can bring to the table. And I don't think she was just talking about the D&D match or like the sassy comments that she's made so far. Like, she was the one who noticed the lights, but I just have a feeling she's going to be a much, much more active participant in part 2. And I'm like super here for it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's talk about the older teenagers. I remember you and I were a little bit uncertain about how we felt about Eddie initially. But I'll say for my part, by the end of the season, I like Eddie.
Yeah, I really like Eddie a lot, actually.
Yeah, he really grew on me.
I think he is a character that will really benefit from rewatching because it is what it is kind of a thing. Like, we spend so much time with characters we don't know yet, and when you are first trying to orient yourself in a new season, that can be really, I was feeling kind of like unmoored. What are we doing? You've definitely got a flair for the dramatic, but then like by the end of part 1, I was like, I have had Eddie for 2 days, and if anything happens to him, I am going to reach through the screen and save him myself. Jot that down.
If Eddie dies, we riot.
Yeah.
Something that did work for me really, really well was how Eddie was talking about realizing that he's a coward or whatever. I love that so much. And I love that they allude to that earlier on. I don't remember which episodes, but probably in episode 2 when they find him in the boathouse or whatever, and he says something like, "And I ran." And you can see it in his face, in his performance, that he is beating himself up. He is realizing things about himself. And then they come back around to it. I was really happy with that.
I don't think it suffers from the lack of this, but the only thing that I think that I was waiting for and they didn't do was for Steve to be like, dude, that's where I started. Like, because that's what happened with Steve, and then he made the different choice.
Right.
So, which is basically what Eddie did.
Yeah.
So I wish there'd been some acknowledgement of that, but I love that scene because Steve and Dustin, man. Steve and Dustin love each other. They're brothers. So, but just the fact that Eddie got to say that, like, no, dude, this kid worships you.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, it's the best.
And I loved that, like, that Eddie was like, and I mean, yeah, I was jealous.
Yeah.
I thought that was cute.
Because so was Steve, I think.
Yeah.
Which you got to see, like, and one of the reviews I read was saying how, like, yeah, the season is long and it's bloated, but you do see a lot of things that are built. You do see things building on each other. And, like, that exchange is a great example of that. They didn't, like, go bigger or, you know, anything with it, but I liked that this season, it's a constant now. And I like that. I really like that. They didn't have, like, Dustin get tired of Steve or vice versa. Or, like, oh, you're cramping my style, get out of here, kid. Like, I don't know. I just like that it's maintaining. And
I mean, Steve is always like, well, why am I the babysitter? But, like, I don't see it as that.
No.
Yeah.
I just love it. It makes me so happy. And I that's one of the reasons that I'm like, if they kill Steve,
I'm gonna be so pissed.
But I kind of feel like they might be like, it might be another misdirect. Like, because I will say, when Nancy got taken at the end, that totally did not see it coming. Heidi even said it when we were watching it. She was like, Steve should have gone first. He's injured.
Something, though, that kind of pissed me off was how they retconned their own selves within the season. You know, like, everybody had to go through a week of headaches and nightmares and bullshit. And then it was like, oh, no, we're just going to take Nancy, like, right now. It's fine.
I didn't even think of that. That's a really good point.
It was such a big moment for Max to realize slowly that her symptoms were the same as the other 2 people who died. And we're just going to throw that in the garbage, kind of, sort of.
And Nancy never saw the clock either.
Yeah. It's just out of nowhere. Maybe it has something to do with being in the Upside Down to begin with.
That could be. I kind of like the fact that they brought it back to Barb.
Yes.
Specifically regarding Steve. And I like that because I think, A, that would be on her mind. So she's thinking about him in that context. And that would have been season 1. But also the fact that bringing up Barb, it's like that was the thing that kind of began to drive them apart. I like that could end up leading to conflict between them. And maybe this will give them like kind of a jumping off point to finally resolve it. Like, for real.
Yeah.
So I like that indirectly brings that to the surface. Like, I thought that was actually a really nice touch. And it feels so natural because that is her trauma. But I also like that they didn't linger there because I think in many ways, Nancy did get justice for Barb. She did close that door. So it's still there. It's always going to be there. But I like that she kind of got out of it pretty quickly.
Here's something that I want to see from Nancy in either part 2 or season 5, assuming that she lives, is that I want her to explicitly state that she wants to be a journalist because of how she was able to help Barb or Barb's family. Like, it's not necessarily because of her trauma surrounding it, but because she was able to do some good when something happened in her life and it gives her a sense of purpose. Nancy's one of my favorite characters, but she's consistently like written as one of the worst somehow. And something like this would help me a lot for them to just come out and have her really be like, I was able to do good with my journalism, and that's where I want the direction of my life to go. And to really bring it back to Barb that way. I think that would be a really good way to honor Barb's memory, you know?
Also, gotta say it, I'm still really here for the Robin and Steve friendship. Like, they handled that pretty well, I thought.
Yeah.
I also like that Steve clearly has kept Robin's secret.
Right.
They walked a very fine line with Robin in terms of I feel like they acknowledged the fact that it's not totally safe for her to be out
Yeah.
But they also don't like take it too seriously, which I think a little bit more stakes wouldn't have hurt, but I don't mind the fact that they also kept it. They acknowledge it. They sidestep it by her saying, "I'm a pariah. I can't just go around asking girls out." It's like, okay, all right, I'm satisfied with that. I wish they would do more with it, but
yeah.
I'll take it. One thing that I'm a little bit still uncertain about how I feel, and I think the second part is going to determine where I stand. This potentially rekindled romance between Steve and Nancy. How do you feel about that?
I know this is so divisive in the fandom in general. I'm sure it is. Ships usually are, and that's fine. Everybody's going to have their opinions, and I just want to say I respect anybody's opinions on their ships. Like, whatever. Have at it. That's the fun of this bullshit, is getting to decide who we have to be together.
Yes, all ships are valid.
Yeah, for me, I guess I don't feel super strongly about any of them in particular, but I like the idea of Nancy and Steve together. The romantic in me really likes the idea of rekindling old romance. I think that's cool when you have a history and then maybe you took a break or something and then you come back together. You have something to build on. I think that can be really cool. However, I do like Nancy and Jonathan together. And also, I like Nancy not necessarily with anybody. Like, I like the idea of her just going, you know what? Steve's got his issues. Jonathan has his issues. I want to go to college and be a journalist for right now.
Mm-hmm. I was ready to be dead set against it.
Yeah.
But I really like their chemistry. They have always had good chemistry. They still do. But the thing is, I keep feeling like, okay, like this is sexy, but what's going to happen when Nancy ends up in the same room as Jonathan again? Because that is also going to happen.
Yes, we've seen Jonathan say to Argyle, basically it's going to be a slow eventual breakup.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's kind of a cop-out.
It is.
And Nancy doesn't know he said that.
Yeah.
As far as Nancy's concerned, she's still with him.
Yeah.
When we were watching the finale, or it's not the finale, when we watched chapter 7, you said that you wonder if Steve is going to kiss Nancy to break her out of her trance.
I think that's not necessarily a prediction. I genuinely think that is a possibility. So with Max, we know that music works. We also saw Robin rifling through the tapes that were on Nancy's dresser, and Max does have her tape player with her. So it's possible that they have like a tape with them that's one of Nancy's. But there's also the kind of Sleeping Beauty trope. But I'm not hoping for a kiss in that moment because she's not there.
Oh, yeah. That's a great point.
I don't necessarily have a problem with the things are overwhelming and I'm terrified and I'm been wanting to kiss you, but I've been holding back and now I'm just gonna kiss you. I think that can be done well and without gross consent stuff. I think it can actually be really sweet and beautiful. But I don't think this is the place for it.
No, I agree.
And I don't know how I feel about them getting back together. I think they could sell me on it.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm at. I think you could sell me on it, but I think it needs to come from actually Steve and Nancy and not every fucking buddy running up to the two of them and being like, you guys should kiss. You guys should kiss. You should have been kissing this whole time.
I don't know that that's necessarily how I would take Dustin pointing it out. I think to me, Dustin was going no, you still clearly have a thing for her. That was embarrassing watching you throw yourself at her. Mm-hmm. And Steve's that's not what I was doing. And I think I both believe Steve and I don't. As far as the triangle goes, I don't like going back to that because in some ways it feels lazy. I feel like this happens so often. It's a wasted opportunity for exploring an actual friendship. However, I am very impressed with their execution of it. I like that, for one thing, at least up to this point, there's no actual cheating that's happened. Neither of them have done it. There's no line that's been crossed as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't feel icky. It feels very organic. They have a lot of very natural chemistry. It feels like it's coming from a place of, yeah, there's some physical attraction there, obviously, and they play into that. I mean, the scene where she's bandaging him up, I'm like, this is a trope, but it works. But it worked.
Yeah.
And in some ways, all of the things that I was hoping to see the show explore with their relationship platonically, I still think there's room for that with them and them having a romantic relationship also. The idea of well, who are they now that they've become these completely different people? What does that interaction look like? So I don't love how we got here, but I'm interested to see where they take it.
Yeah.
I think probably my biggest like concern with it is, how does everybody get to have a happily ever after? Like, how does someone not get hurt? That's my big concern, because when Jonathan's because I do like her and Jonathan together, and I feel like Jonathan got short shrift this season.
I have to try to take a step back from being in the very online 2020s and realize that even Karen hasn't tried to call Mike after he landed in California. So it's like, okay, fine, yeah. Nancy and Jonathan haven't talked in a while. I just need to accept that that's how shit happened in the 80s. Like, I wasn't a person in the 80s. I was a baby, so I don't remember. I don't know how it worked, how little people really communicated long distance. But even if Karen hasn't checked in with Mike and hasn't yet realized that she can't reach him even, then I should just let it go that Nancy and Jonathan haven't quite been communicating.
Let's chat a little bit about the California group.
Argyle was basically just dazed and confused.
Yep.
But it didn't seem like, I was watching Dazed and Confused. I was just reminded of that movie, and I think that kind of held through most of the rest of the season with other characters and stuff too. I loved Argyle.
Yes, I loved Argyle too. And I think actually, like, Argyle is kind of on paper, he is a walking, talking cliche. Like, he's a trope, but Eduardo Franco playing the role, he made that character work for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's tremendous as Argyle. I'm like, and it's I think it largely is due to the performance.
So I love Argyle. Argyle's my dude. I don't know if I want to get high with him, but I'll hang out with him. He went from a like, oh my God, another new character, why, to just being like an absolute delight. Yeah, I really love him.
Let's talk a bit about Jonathan.
I like the direction his character takes. The more I think about it, the more I like it. I like the idea that he, maybe his way of coping, or maybe his way of trying to rediscover who he is without having to cope with all the shit now that they're all fine, is to become the person that he's become, and to smoke a lot of pot or whatever, and to not fix his car and have his stoner friend drive them to school or whatever. But it seems, doesn't it feel kind of relatable in some sense though, to just, decide at some point, like, you know what, I'm going to smoke pot and go to community college. Like, it's not necessarily how I felt at 18 or 17, but I think that can be very relatable. It's just, we don't get to see him get there.
Something was like off about it. It just didn't feel like, I find that with Jonathan, it's not even so much like I mind the idea of him like being a stoner or not wanting to stay with Nancy. Like, I actually feel like we could have gotten there, but in a way that felt more believable to me for his character. I do not buy, especially when all like him saying like, I gotta be here for my family. I even said at the end of season 3, I'm like, I believe that he would go with them and not stay in Hawkins to be with Nancy, because his family will always come first. That I buy. However, Joyce is surprisingly doing perfectly fine. Doesn't seem to be grieving Hopper at all. We don't get to see it anyway. We don't see, we get the one exchange between he and Will where he's like, hey, have a good time. And he's like, okay. Like, that's not enough for me to justify him saying my family still needs me. I'm like, Elle, Will, and Joyce are fine. Like, to me, a more like expected trajectory that I thought Jonathan would take in terms of just like his mental state would have been, oh, no one actually needs me. So what is my purpose? Like, and honestly, like, if that had been what he said in his conversation with Argyle or some variation thereof, I would have bought it. I absolutely would. Because then he's like, what's the point? Like, it almost would have led to a more like, all right, fine, I guess no one needs me. Yeah. That's been his whole purpose ever since we met him. And in the first shot of him at season 1 when he's making breakfast, it's like, because I don't buy that he doesn't want to go to college. I fundamentally do not buy that. He has put his dreams on hold because of being needed by other people. He's wanted to go to NYU since he was 10. When did that change? And if he's not needed by the people in his life anymore, which granted the show is implying that he is, I can't get on board with that. I just don't buy that for his character. It feels I'm just really bummed because I do think that Jonathan has they've just taken his character since the first 2 seasons. I just feel like they've taken him in a direction that I don't like. I liked the season 1 and season 2 Jonathan a lot more.
It's kind of like they were like, you know what? We've got this older teenage boy that just moved to California. Logically, what would he do next? Obviously become a pothead. It's like that was their entire reasoning for everything.
Yeah.
Although, you know, in the middle of nowhere, Indiana, they're probably doing like heroin and shit anyway.
I mean, look at what they did to Benny's Diner. Like, which that was weird. The basketball team, like, they're like squatting there. It's weird. And it's not like, oh, Jonathan can't, like, I just feel like if he became a stoner, he'd be doing just.
He realizes his family doesn't really need him anymore and falls into a pit of self-doubt.
Mm-hmm,
like that's pretty much it. And he either copes with it by doing weed or whatever, or you know, that's just incidentally a part of that. It doesn't necessarily make it worse or better. It's just part of what he does now. But he just falls into that pit of self-doubt because he realizes the people he loves don't really need him. I totally buy that. And whether or not the drugs are in the picture and getting so high at the dinner table that he can't even register what his mom is saying to him, like, fine, whatever. But they don't really do that. They kind of play it more for laughs than anything.
Yeah, he's starting to feel expendable, and that makes me very sad.
Oh, that's a good way to put it, though.
You know, as the season progresses and we start to see, like, Jonathan being called to action through Elle getting in trouble, through shit going on with Will, the agents attacking the house, so on and so forth, Jonathan just snaps back into his old self. And in a way, like, that works, but also in a way, I'm like, so why were we doing all of this other stuff and saying that he was this completely different person who's just like a loser now, when we know that that's not who he is?
So that's Jonathan I hated the stuff at the skating rink.
Yeah, my God, when she was out there surrounded by everybody, I was just like yelling at the screen, like, go out there, like, go be with her. Why are you just standing there doing nothing? And then I saw somebody post, I think on Twitter, like, you know, if Max was there, she wouldn't have stood for that for a second. She would have gone right out there, slapped some bitches, and dragged Elle off the rink.
Oh, fuck yeah.
And Mike and Will were completely fucking useless. That made me so mad.
I also don't get the characterization of why Elle has been lying all this time.
For real.
I don't get it.
That never really gets explained. She never really says why.
And the question is asked multiple times. Mike asks her and Will asks her a couple times, especially after all that bananas they went through last season with him lying to her.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Like, I get that they wanted to go a certain direction stylistically with that whole opening sequence with her saying that everything's fine and it's obviously not fine and having that juxtaposition, but it doesn't work in terms of her character.
She's very different. She doesn't understand social cues. She was a lab rat, like, for the vast majority of her childhood. So she doesn't have socialization skills outside of her extremely small circle, all of which is gone now, except for Will. She literally can't speak English super well. But I could see her, like, especially because she doesn't have access to her powers, just, like, drawing in on herself and becoming much, much more angry and all of that. So, like, you could end up at the same place where she ends up beating up the prom queen without doing all this weird shit.
I think they were trying to make the parallel between what happens at the roller rink and what happens in the lab in her memory to make that connection. And I just think it was a little too heavy-handed.
And the fact that literally everybody at the rink is in on this joke.
Yeah.
Even if you are in a small town, that's not going to be the case. Like, you're not going to, like, you know, you usually have in, like, a high school, like, some kind of queen bee who, like, rules either through, you know, adoration or fear. But you never have someone who is so incredibly popular that every single person agrees with them when they start bullying somebody. You always have people who are at minimum uncomfortable with what's going on. And also you have people who are opposed to what's going on. So, like, there would have been other students there who would have run up and been like, hey, are you okay? Or it just, I hate to use the phrase, it's not realistic in a show about alternate dimensions and tentacle monsters.
But maybe what they were trying to do was go for that, like, this is the lens through which Elle is experiencing this. But that feels a little bit too much like, okay, if you're going for like unreliable narrator, that needs to be more consistent across other aspects of the show as well.
What did you feel about when she was talking to Mike after? He tried to get her to talk about that whole thing and she just kind of wouldn't.
None of the romantic relationships have lasted. We have not seen a couple get together and stay together.
Yeah.
Not one. And I feel like you can do conflict within couples without having them split up. Hopefully, we're going to get that with Hopper and Joyce. But even there, we haven't seen them get together and stay together.
Yeah.
Every single couple has split. And even if Steve and Nancy get back together, it means she and Jonathan split up.
Yeah.
So it would have been nice to have seen conflict between Mike and Elle, but have it not be, you don't love me. I think you could have still kept the, like, you looked at me like I was a monster.
I did actually like the from Mike. What frustrates me about Mike in season 3 and season 4 is that Mike says things, but his actions indicate something else. And so he's like, yeah, I love you, but I sign everything from Mike. You know, yeah, you're my best friend, but I don't call you.
That's true.
The problem that I have with Elle and Mike is actually what it does to Mike's character. He's not really much of a driving force in the show. For having been the main character, arguably, in season 1, the lens through which we were supposed to view everything, to meet Elle, to see all the things happening in Hawkins' lab, and now he's some guy that we barely even saw, you know? That's frustrating.
Yeah, and I think that, like, her having that moment of confronting him was really important. I don't know what's going on with the Mike character. I don't know if Wolfhard is having a tough time with the acting. I don't know if they're having a hard time, like, keeping Mike in the story, given, like, how big of a puzzle it's become. But as of right now, I don't really like the idea of Mike and Elle together because he's not there for her emotionally. Yes, like, she has been lying to him, but at the same time, she's been lying so egregiously that I feel like it should have been pretty easy to understand that something else is going on here, and he just didn't question it. Now, like, how he was at the roller rink, had no problem with that. Apart from, he should have gone out to help her. And I actually really loved him saying to her, I have been bullied my entire life.
Yeah.
What makes you think that I'm not going to understand school bullies? But I don't know if they're going with he grew up and so he's just different than he was when he was a kid or what's going on. But the Mike that stood in front of Will and was telling him all of these, like, treasured memories to try to bring Will back from the mind flare. Like, the Mike that reached out to Elle every day for an entire year, knowing that she wasn't going to answer, but needing to feel that connection with her anyway. That Mike is not here.
Nope. It feels very flippant.
Yeah, and the other thing is he has watched her kill people.
Yeah.
But her, like, breaking some asshole's nose is the worst.
That's a really good point.
If I were Mike in that situation and she said, you looked at me like I was a monster, I would say, no. I was worried about what all those other people were going to say and do and how we were going to make sure that you didn't get in trouble. I just wanted to make sure that I could protect you. And I didn't know how because so many people had seen, and it would be so easy for Mike to say that. Because honestly, I think that's pretty much the truth. I mean, I don't think Mike gives a shit that she broke somebody's nose. If we're really going to sit here and say that he was afraid of her in that moment, I don't even know what to say. That's ridiculous.
Well, I don't feel like they fully commit to that either, though.
Yeah.
I feel like it, and that's kind of where I mean, like, it feels very flippant. It's like, if Mike had a moment where he was afraid of her, commit to that. Like, that Elle and Mike and Will are all going, like, shit.
Yeah.
Then Angela should have been a lot more obviously seriously hurt. Because in a way, some of that doesn't sit terribly comfortably with me. And especially in light of, like, a lot of school shootings.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, like, what are you trying to say with this? It's murky, and that's what I mean. Like, if you're gonna go down that road, commit to it.
Well, I said as we were watching it, and still stand by this, that Elle, like, fuck her powers. Elle should have just walked up to Angela a long time ago and just punched her.
Yes.
Just punched her.
The thing of, like, I was assaulted would still track.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that she did was because they wanted to make it that, like, she really seriously hurt Angela, but then they don't commit to that.
Yeah, because she's not hurt. She's sitting there, like, the cops are saying that she has a severe concussion, like, and this is a little bit, like, I shouldn't be wearing my pretty head about this because it's a movie, but pretty much anytime you have a concussion, you have a loss of consciousness. Angela never lost consciousness. She was not, some of the other symptoms are that people are dazed. They don't remember what happened. They can't do the thing where they track your finger with their eyes. Angela had absolutely no symptoms of a concussion. So when that cop was like, she has a degree 2 concussion, I was like, no, she fucking doesn't. She has a broken nose.
I thought they were going to do that when the first, like, in the immediate aftermath, when she first sits up, she does look really dazed, and she's, like, kind of expressionless.
Yeah.
And then she starts crying. She starts screaming. And I'm like, yeah, it felt really murky. It feels enough to make me very uncomfortable.
Yeah, if you actually, you bring something up here, because we watched the first episode less than a week, I think, after the shootings in Uvalde. I kind of knew what to expect, but simply the way that they shot it, I'm very, very glad they put a warning there. I didn't make it through that scene. I had to stop watching. And first of all, because of the way that they kept flashing back to that scene over and over and over and over, I think it does actually show a certain lack of sensitivity when it comes to mass violence. And I think that's kind of tied to the lack of understanding and the lack of delicacy around bullying in this season, which is a bummer because it was handled so well in the first season. And again, I think there's a gender thing there. I think that they were not understanding how bullying shows up differently for girls. And they were trying to, like, you know, they did approach it differently, but you had the escalation in the first season where eventually it became very dangerous, where, like, they could have actually, you know, someone could have actually died. That's very realistic and very delicately done. But in this, it was just bigger.
Well, the other thing that occurs to me is that when Elle kills the 2 guards, that's in the middle of them throwing her into, it's in the midst of them being abusive to her. She stands up and goes, as you said, I'm not going to let you treat me like that. And she makes that decision in the moment.
Yeah.
Like, if she had been on the rink and she took the camera and smashed it or something, that's more of the Elle that we've seen. And also because it feels weird in some ways to circle back to this, because I understand we're coming up into her remembering the parallels with blah, but this is part of why I think the Lost Sister is important, because this is exactly what Elle faced in that episode. Mm-hmm. And so in a way, this felt regressive to me.
Yeah, I think we've also done the Am I the Monster thing twice, at least.
It was also very unclear if those flashes to the Hawkins the massacre at Hawkins Lab, is she actually remembering those things or not? It was a little bit murky there too.
Yeah. My biggest criticism of season 4 so far is actually the way that they did the massacre and the way that they led us to believe that Elle was responsible for so long. I understand that it services the plot twist to not know who committed the massacre, to not know how it went down. But they did not need to imply that it was Elle who did it, and they did not need to show it in that way. But God knows we all wish that those children had not died in Uvalde. But even if that hadn't happened, that was not the only school shooting that has ever happened.
I mean, there have been multiple shootings since then. How did you feel about Will?
I like that he's not being either physically or psychologically tortured this season. That is a definite plus.
That is very true.
They're making it like the writing is on the wall that he is gay and that he is in love with Mike. And, like, I could be wrong about that. Like, he could be gay and not in love with Mike. That would be a big relief. But given the material that we have right now, that's kind of what the indication is. And I don't think that we have the time or the space to handle that in a way that is respectful of how incredibly soul-damagingly sad that is.
Will does point out, though, there's that scene before the shootout in their house where he says, it wasn't the police or whoever that saved me. It was you, Mike. And that's actually, I was like, oh, okay, I guess that could be part of it. You know, like Mike has saved him multiple times at this point. It wasn't Owens that saved him in season 2, though. It was Mike. It was the kids. So that, okay, I get that. I will say I did like the short scene between him and Mike in the junkyard where they're talking on the car. I just rewatched that just before we started recording this, just so I could have it fresh, where he says, what if they don't like the truth? Yeah, what if you come out, he doesn't say come out, but what if you come out with something, any secret to somebody you care about and they don't like the truth? Like, yeah, that's very powerful. Like, it's way more risky to come out with this shit than to someone you know than someone you don't know and don't care about.
Mm-hmm. Well, and especially after what happened between them last year.
At least it still seems to be building towards something.
In that Variety article, and then I read in a couple other blurbs I've seen that apparently there is going to be, they've said there is some resolution in part 2. They said we're looking forward to that because then we and the cast can start talking about it, because that's part of the problem, is that there's so much they can't talk about. So that is actually going to conclude this episode. It's just that we had such long and in-depth conversations, as we always do, that it's taking me a bit longer to edit everything down into something that's reasonable to listen to and coherent, for that matter. So bear with me. But thank you very much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed what we have presented so far, and of course, we definitely want to know what you guys all think, so you can catch us as usual on TikTok and Instagram. We also have an email address. All of that information is in the show notes, as always. I will also be popping onto TikTok here and there because we recorded these conversations before some of the new photos had come out and some more information had been revealed. So there are a few things that I had some thoughts on, so I will keep plugging away on these reaction episodes, and the release of that episode will be before part 2 drops, obviously. Probably within the next few days is my goal. Of course, hope everybody listening is happy and healthy, and until next time, over and out. I want to know. I am just as curious as Dustin. What did she find under Lucas's bed?
Ooh, I forgot about that.
The look that he gives Lucas, that like head turn with his eyes all wide, I was like, what'd she find under your bed? Like, it's so funny. Like, again, Matarazzo just, God, just killing the comedic timing. Like,
but I was like, what, does he dress like a cowboy sometimes or something like that? I don't know, whatever. Well, I guess maybe we'll see. Maybe we won't, but
that was so funny. Like,
it was.
What did she find? Like.